something.
Rusty's really wet.
Yeah.
Rusty's got.
Chief staff.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes we have people that have been for.
We can trust Cook 2 miles to Walgreens.
I'm all right today.
Yeah.
I think it's just like.
Yeah, the only issue right now still is driving along.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you
It's
just go.
middle lane, left turn lane. It still might go there because you can't read this. Road.
Okay, call the meeting to order. Would like to have silent. Okay, no real comments for me. Welcome, everybody. Glad to be here. So just jump right in. Lots to talk about today. Pretty full agenda. So Dale, if you want to take it over here.
Right. You want me to stand here in front of the camera? Okay, good. Thanks,
So
Katie.
the speaker is like here, but it's supposed to pick up everybody and the picture, the camera should follow the voice of whoever's talking.
Great, thank you. So I switched 2 and 3 just because it flows better. 2 and 4 related, so I switched 2 and 3. So Dale Morris, City of Charleston, Chief Resilience Officer, worked through some things. So for those of you who don't know, because Liz Deek just came in and people said, who are you? So for those of you who don't know, y'all know the mayor. There's Liz Deek, she's the mayor's chief of staff, and is
Okay.
doing a lot of things for the city. So I don't know how she sleeps at night, but anyway, it's good. So welcome, Liz. Joint status updates. So talk about 2 key projects, and Evan's going to take one that we've been working on. Evan's an intern for that resilience office. The Army Corps tidal and inland flooding. As you know, we had a larger project or a similar study, Charleston Peninsula and storm surge risk reduction. Completed a couple of years ago. Figuring out now what we're going to do with that project going forward. City Council, Mayor, Congressional delegation got us funding for a tidal and inland flooding study. So inland flooding is rainfall flooding. This is one of the first times the Army Corps has ever done this, combined tidal and inland flooding in a study. So Charleston is benefiting from that. Part of the challenges with the Peninsula project is it was not looking at tidal flooding, although it could manage it, but it wasn't looking at it. So this study, because it is citywide, allows us to try to incorporate benefits from this study into that project, if and as we go forward. So for this study, the cost sharing agreement was signed, and the project was started 2 months ago. So moving forward, there's a big project team from the Army Corps of Engineers, folks from Puget Sound and Idaho and Savannah and just all around. A lot of core disciplines, risk assessment, planning, engineering, environmental, cultural, and historic, because we have to consider those things, and the Army Corps has money to help with those things. Environmental justice and economics. The city is part of the project delivery team. They're not doing it separately from us. They're doing it with us, or we're doing it with them. Weekly meetings, some time-consuming considerations. With the Resilience Office, the Stormwater Department, and the City Design Center are all part of this team. So we work a lot with them. It's really important. If the non-federal sponsor is not represented in these studies on an active basis, sometimes the Corps will just forget the non-federal sponsor. And that has led to problems in the past, not in Charleston, but elsewhere. So we are active and intentional in what we're doing with the tidal study. The flood types is we're looking at all of them. So surge, tidal, rainfall, groundwater, compound. For those of you who don't know, compound flooding is when the tides are up and the rain's falling, or the groundwater is up and the rain's falling, something like that. So this is
Recording in progress.
compound flooding is rather new in trying to model. So we know it happens. We've known it happens for years. The numerical models used to do risk assessment for this have only in the last 5 to 8 years become good enough to help good model outputs for you can plan better in the future. So compound flooding is really good stuff. It requires a lot of compound flood modeling, requires a lot of computational power. We have the comprehensive water plan almost finished, and I'll talk about that in a second. I wanted to let you all know that the water plan risk assessment was done a year ago. And some of the recommended projects in the water plan, they are informing and pulling forward and making the tidal inland study more efficient and more effective, more intentional and directional. So there is a link between the water plan and some of the study areas of the tidal inland study. Any questions about that? Good, okay.
Dale, if I may, it's also important to note that this is, it's been a lot talked about with regards to the peninsula and flooding, but this really broadens the narrative and the communication and the potential funding to the entire city. And I think that's very important when you're looking at getting support for our local match on any of these initiatives, because what we're going to ultimately be talking about as we've dug into it with Dale and his team is a lot of money, a lot of money. And the local match is something that is very relevant and needs to be paid attention to because we don't want to present things and ideas and concepts out there that aren't achievable. So I think this is a great approach. You will see from our office kind of blending the two, because I think we just need to think about it holistically. Most people, constituents in particular, don't really care that there are two Army Corps studies technically, and then there's a comprehensive water plan, and then there's there's all kinds of different analysis and studies and data points, but people just want to know what we're going to do in terms of resiliency efforts with sea level rise, additional flooding, kind of city writ large. So anyway, I think it's just, this is an incredibly important first step, or major step, I would say, in facilitating that collective conversation.
Okay. As the mayor, thank you, Mayor. As the mayor noted, this is focus of this study is citywide. The water plan, and we know this intuitively in the city, the water plan has identified the areas of highest risk, not only risk, but the highest risk being in West Ashley and on James Island, and then of course on the peninsula. So those are the sort of key focal areas right now for this study. It has the authority to go beyond that, but we're focusing right now on these three areas because they have the highest, most pressing risk at this moment. So good. Katie, this is not advancing. Is there another trick?
I know.
Thank you. So the comprehensive water plan. This is one of the first things you'll see. This will be presented in a story map format. It's not an ugly PDF or something like that. It's in a story map format. It's online. It can be a living document. It's very accessible. This is the introductory slide. So, that you're getting sense of this. You can't see it at the top, but the key components or the key chapters of the water plan are actually hidden behind that black bar. So, the water plan has been under development for 18 months, I'd say. Final polishing is underway right now. Pencils down on the project is next week. As they say, the mayor and his staff have been briefed regularly on this. The mayor is asking a lot of really good questions to the team and to me, and how do we link this up and make it more integrated, and asking just some very good questions, because this is a big area and big study and what's going on and what's being recommended. So the executive team, they're looking at it, making some suggestions of how to improve it. They're all good suggestions. Again, we think this will be ready sometime this summer, maybe a little bit sooner. We're just waiting to see on that, depending on how the mayor team's recommended. This is just one of the graphics, one of the images that are drawn up. This is New Market Creek, where the Ravenel Bridge comes under. So there's that water body. The water body, New Market Creek, is importing water at high tides, flooding Cool Blow, flooding sort of the lower part of the neck area, flooding, getting a bit into the east side neighborhood. So what do you do with that? And we have a low line project over there again, and that is tricky, but we're trying to see how we can integrate these things so you can have more beautiful. This is an old creek, but it is now sort of a backyard neglected condition. And can we do something different with that and do something in a way that reduces flood risk and makes the area more valuable? So look at, this is one, is this larger look on in West Ashley. We have storm surge we're looking at, but future tidal risks to West Ashley, the lower part of West Ashley, near the Stone River. There's a greenway, there's Highway 17. You need to create bumps in the way to stop the tides from coming in. So these sort of long moves. The greenway is something we think over time could be elevated to provide a lot of protection from tidal impact upon lots of West Ashley. And if you do some marsh restoration out here, now you're getting a multiple line of defense structure. And that is a way we can keep people safe and allow them to stay there in a way that is productive and useful. So these are some of the things you see here. Again, Long Branch Creek and the 4 acres water body. See, this is what the water plan is getting at. Again, we're refining, working through this thing. You'll get a sense of this is the direction of the water plan. The values and principles, strategies, these were developed in the community outreach phase of the project. These are not the water plan's values. These are the community's values. And of course, we talk with city folks. So those are there. And then the strategies are here. And I will just let you know that I mention this regularly. So this is my favorite one. Cost comes before the benefit. The Netherlands was the first nation with a stock exchange. The word stock is the Dutch word for plank. And the stock exchange came from the investors who were investing in wood planks to send the East Indies companies and the West Indian companies abroad to make the Netherlands very rich. So that's the first stock exchange. The building for the Dutch stock exchange is still in the center of Amsterdam. And on the top, it says the costs come before the benefits. So to make ourselves stay safe, we have to invest. That's all that means. And this is the really important thing that we just to be safe, we're going to have to make some changes, spend some money, but it's going to transform and allow Charleston. There's a lot of opportunity here. It's a beautiful city. So these investments are essential, and the water plan tries to pull that out. And with that, one of the components of the water plan, we don't know collectively, we don't know much about groundwater in the United States and what it means for sea level rise impacts and what those sea level rise impacts on the shallow groundwater means for how do we live safe. So one of the things that we did in the water plan is we installed a number of shallow groundwater monitoring wells. A wonderful College of Charleston graduate student, Evan, is here. He's been managing, collecting the data. He's going to give a little presentation to you about what's been being done with that. So Evan, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Evan Sisler, like Phil said, from the College of Charleston. I'm working as the intern in the Resilience office, working on the ground monitoring and groundwater monitoring, excuse me. So I just wanted to start with the importance of monitoring groundwater. One of the first very important things is subsidence and heaving. Groundwater levels, when they go very low, for instance, drought, can cause deeper flooding and can destroy infrastructure. And on the other side, very high groundwater levels can cause heaving of the ground, which is the ground raising, which also can cause damage to infrastructure. Groundwater capillary intrusion is actually a very interesting thing that I wasn't aware of before I started this internship, and it's where water comes up out of the ground from high groundwater and penetrates into concrete and wood foundations of buildings, essentially, which is very bad for infrastructure and for buildings. It also can cause mold growth and other moisture problems. All the public health concerns I'm sure you're all aware of from standing water, whether it's the mosquitoes that can carry diseases, chemical and feces contamination in water, as well as hazards to pedestrians and motorists, and also infrastructure like electrical infrastructure, for example. And groundwater recharge and absorption rates, there's a very delicate balance of the proper level of groundwater. And we need to understand the way groundwater fluctuates before and after storms to understand how much more water the ground can take. And a major thing is our flood risk assessment. Monitoring groundwater levels can help with modeling flooding and creating floodplain maps, which can help with zoning and kind of every point infrastructure was affected, but can help you plan infrastructure and new buildings and foundations. And it also helps you plan out maintenance when some of these things are at risk from high groundwater. So in August In March of 2023, a team from Deltaris, in partnership with the city, installed 3 groundwater wells on the Lower Peninsula. One in Cannon Park, one in Colonial Lake, and one in Washington Square Park. And these groundwater wells consist of a steel casing with a PVC pipe in the center that goes well into the groundwater table so it can measure the fluctuations. And then the groundwater monitor, also called a diver, is suspended from a cable at the top of the pipe. And it measures temperature and pressure. And then the pressure, through calculating the difference between the air pressure and the water pressure, gives us our groundwater elevation. So in August of 2023, the Deltaris team installed 11 more groundwater wells. 2 on James Island, 1 in West Ashley, 1 on Johns Island, 1 on Daniel Island, and 6 more on the peninsula. And 2 of those are on the neck in the Rosemont community, and those were funded by a third party. And so that's August, so we're almost at a year. I started collecting the data in February and finished collecting it all in April. And this is just a video of MUSC, the well at MUSC and the well at Colonial Lake, showing it's starting in December. It's going to show the December 17th nor'easter. And then it's also going to show the Christmas storms. And ignore the bottom line on the Colonial Lake is the groundwater, or is technically the ground level, which this data, I need to go back through and correct it properly. But on the MUSC, it is the correct ground level. So you can see from the Christmas storms, it almost would cause pooling. And then that's also, there was a heavy rainfall event on January 8th.
So explain that a little bit. So it gets up to the blue line and then you'll get flooding from the groundwater?
Yes, once that's corrected, but on the MUSC one, that is the correct ground level. So the groundwater table, if you saw on that, was very close to the ground level, but not. But theoretically, yes, once the level passes that, then you have pooling in that area because the ground's saturated and the water has nowhere to go.
But I mean, even if it doesn't reach the blue line, the ground's pretty
The
saturated.
ground's pretty saturated, yeah. And we'll see in this next.
And it moves, it drops, like that's the timing of how quickly it drops. Like what's the day or the gap between the apex of the flooding or the groundwater to when it gets back to its normal level?
So from the December storms, and here is, this is Etowah Park in Kiowa, or on Daniel Island. And you can see, so this is the December, so pretty steady groundwater, no rain events, no tidal events or anything for the first half of December. And then the water level goes up, and this is a much higher area on Daniel Island, so it's not as extreme as the downtown examples. But then you can see here, it's maybe trending downward a little bit, but it didn't have a lot of time to get rid of water before all of the multiple days of raining. And that spiked it again, and then it did start to recede a little faster, but these divers are designed to run for 10 years before you need to recharge them, basically. So this is kind of short-term data because we don't even have a full year on all of the wells yet. But that's the kind of trends we're really going to be able to figure out as we get into 2, 3, 4 years of these collecting data.
And Evan explained that the groundwater level, the mean level, the average level is really important to understand how that changes over time, because the higher the groundwater over a decade, the less infiltration capacity you have in the soil to store rainfall. And then temporally, if we have a couple of rainfall events, and we're hoping the water is going to run off or infiltrate, we know that's not going to occur. So we have to think, okay, what do we do as a resilience measure or as a additional measure to make sure that when those events occur, we have to plan for more runoff, what that means for the stormwater system. So these are the things we don't know yet. We're just starting to see, and you'll see, Evan will show this, there is difference between the various spaces in the city on this.
Mhm.
So each unique spot will have a different strategy or remediation strategy for it.
Can I ask a question? How much, if at all, any of this, we're hoping that the average citizen will be able to understand?
The end goal is to have like an ArcGIS online application that will explain this to the public and have the data available to the public.
Okay.
Pick up on that. Do we know if any builders, I mean, we've had all this construction take place. Has anyone looked at the groundwater infiltration, which could eventually have damage to the infrastructure of the buildings they're building?
I can't speak for everyone, but I do know that the team that's working on renovating the Stern Center at College of Charleston right now is looking at groundwater infiltration and groundwater levels. They've actually been asking us for data, but we're still collecting and finishing it. So some builders are. I think they wanted the data because there's some specific drainage measure they had to do that they didn't think they needed to based on what the groundwater levels are actually doing compared to previous studies. So, yes.
Yeah, that's an awakening.
This is the Freddie Whaley Community Center in Rosemont. It's the same December storm, 17th, and Christmas storm, and you can see same steady trend of groundwater level through December. And then the nor'easter came, raised the water level above the ground level, which I was not there to confirm that this did cause pooling, but theoretically there was pooling there. The water receded much quicker than in the previous area on Daniel Island to back below ground level. And then the Christmas storms came in again and groundwater level went back above and pooled until it receded again. And here is Etowah Park again. This is November, but just to show the line is pretty straight within about 20 centimeters, some slight fluctuations. This is kind of to show in November, there were 9 sunny day flooding events. And at least in this area, the tides are not affecting the groundwater level. And this is also at 11 feet. NAVD 88 at this area. And here's another example of the Lenovar playground in West Ashley. This is what kind of the normal, this is the entire data from August to March. This is what a normal groundwater, this is what they look like when they come out. But this is also showing groundwater level that's not affected by tides. And here is White Point Gardens. And you can see all of those spikes are the tide affecting the pressure inside the well, which means there is some tidal interference at the battery. And here's just a close-up of October. And you can see all these fluctuations are just from this, it's from the tides causing pressure changes back and forth. Kind of, it seems to change 2 or 3 times per high to low tide cycle. But this is a typical example of what you would see when there's tidal interference in the groundwater. So here's the 11 well sites and are the red dots. Yellow is the city and blue are city parks. Because so far, I'm pretty sure all of our wells are in city parks because it's the easiest logistically to put them in. So we have the funding to put in, I believe, 4 roughly more wells. So we're also looking at future sites. And so based on being within the city limits and the easy ones at first are where there's gaps and there's parks. So the first one is that's in a good gap area and in an important area is West Ashley Park, because it backs right up to the Church Creek, which is a big flooding concern in West Ashley. And especially if we could put a well around 100 to 200 meters somewhere along here off of the creek, so that it's not to monitor Church Creek flooding, see if the creek is affecting the groundwater level, and also just to study infiltration of rainwater in those soils in West Ashley. We're trying to put more wells off the peninsula, but there's a lot of parks in this area, the kind of the Haygood Fishburne intersection, which is sunny day flooding multiple times a week, almost, it seems like. And I think a well somewhere along the Haygood Ave in the Harmon Fields Park could possibly help us figure out if that's also getting the tidal signals like White Point is, because it seems to be more tidal sunny day flooding in that area. Another area of where there's not a well so far of concern is the northern part of James Island. There's also lots of parks, but even potentially in West Ashley on the Greenway as well, to kind of study the Wapoo Creek kind of wetland area in northern James Island, southern West Ashley here. And so those are the ones where there are parks, where it would be, once we nail down a good location based on soils and some other things, it would be fairly easy to install these wells. And kind of the areas where there's not parks, but I think are still gaps, is kind of southwestern, southeastern Johns Island. The airport is in the city. That'd be a good location to put a well. A lot of it is fill and graded, but the northern side is natural land. It's kind of the same idea as like Church Creek, having it a couple 100 feet off of the stone mill to figure out the flooding in that area. And another large gap is the whole Clements Ferry, Canehoy area, which is also no parks, but I think that's an interesting area. It has a lot of different elevation than the rest of the city. And it's still between two waterways. It would be an interesting area to study the water as well. And just one more additional suggestion is the company we're using the divers from, they also make divers that can read salinity. So these would be, it would be good to introduce some of these sensors potentially to the peninsula, especially in like White Point Gardens, to confirm the tidal interference with salinity. Thanks. Any questions?
But I'll just make a comment. You know, I think environmental studies are required for even sales of property. Maybe one day we would need to include in that environmental study, something like this.
Sure, I mean, I think a lot of developers study the groundwater at their site. It's just not shared or reported, nor is it required to be, but getting that information would be really good. I think one addition to what Evan said is we asked him to also look at, when he's suggesting these sites for future wells. The city has numerous types of soil underneath it, and so the groundwater wells that we have now are in certain types of soil. And I asked him to consider, okay, where are other types of soils in the city that we don't have a well in yet? So to overlay that with this suggested placement of future wells. So he's gonna write a little paper for us and put all this in writing. And then we have a new intern starting, and Evan is going to train her how to do this work. So
Evan, what's the cost for the install? Well,
I'm not 100% on that.
2,000 to 4,000.
Okay.
And the well itself, the diver is the most expensive part, labor to install it, and then the materials to install it, and it's not that bad. And these divers will last for a decade.
Yeah.
So.
I do know for sure the diver is around $500, $600, $700, and then the one I had at the end, that one that reads salinity, is closer to like $2,000, for example. But
so in an ideal world, you're spending like a relatively insignificant amount of money, but if you take all the data and then compile it, then you could actually map out essentially the entire city of Charleston.
You can with a good dispersion of wells, a spatial dispersion of wells across different soil types. And then the tidal signals and the storm signals over top of it, and then normal weather, rain and, drought and whatever, then you can create a citywide groundwater model.
Is there a standard model when given groundwater in certain soil conditions? Because I would think that would be extremely relevant. I mean, and or fill areas versus high ground areas, original high ground areas. So in other words, taking those variables, creating an algorithm in some standard process that would give you a baseline. So there are industry standards, and kind of what are those industry standards?
So I don't know if there's industry standards in the set that this is what the industry is required to do. I know they're there. One of the things that we would like to understand better after a couple years of data, put it into the risk models we have for flooding is, okay, how does this work in different areas? That's really important. Again, I don't know, Mayor, if there is a standard industry model programmatic authority for them to do this work.
Not necessarily authority, it's just more industry standard, professional organizations, that you can make it a consistent benchmark, right? That is known professionally or within the engineering community that can give you consistent data sets based on some.
Mayor, it seems to me this is important because I think really the question is, what's the historical information? What is your data? What's that groundwater table doing over time, right?
That's my point.
Right. And so I don't think there's an industry standard as to where your groundwater is. It just is where it is. The challenges that groundwater rising presents is going to be telling, and we're only going to know that as we start with baseline and see if it's rising over time, if it's a storm event, a high tide and pressure event. It's super interesting. I mean, we've talked about groundwater a lot and something that we've really wanted to get our hands around for a long time. So this is a great start.
So I can ask true groundwater experts your question. I'll do that.
Yeah, I just think we don't want to be using a standard that might be, have issues that could be questioned in terms of what the results would be. That's all.
I'm just selfishly motivated on this particular issue, because I mean, at the end of the day, if you had the data, right? And then you pointed it out, utility infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like specifically, I'm interested in like electric infrastructure. I probably can correlate your data to underground failure on the peninsula, places that are underground, and then maybe another point in the matrix on where to avoid additional investment. It's bad investment on top of already things that have been invested. So it'd be fascinating. I mean, I was asking for the cost. It wasn't, because I think that's relatively cheap. If we could ever correlate the data properly, get the algorithm right, it would be pretty significant.
It looks like Councilmember
I've been trying to,
Jenkins has a question online.
yeah, can you hear me?
Go for it.
So I guess first thing is,
Hang
there
on,
are,
Lloyd, nobody can hear you. It's volume.
I don't know why.
hello?
Because I already tried to turn this volume up. It didn't work.
Can you hear me? I guess that's a no.
Okay,
There you
yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. Thanks. I guess one quick question. So when we put these wells in, did we do soil profiles at each of the locations?
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess the second point is, yeah, there are some commercially available models that will model. I don't know if we can like incorporate them into our system, but there are some commercially available models that can model rainfall. I don't know how they handle tidal inundation, but you can pretty well predict like how the water is going to flow into the soil and how that will affect the groundwater tables. I think Danny and Mr. Mayor, I think that was your question. I think whether we can incorporate it into some kind of a city system that would alert you as to whether or not we're going to end up with pooling, that'd be an interesting challenge.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
All right, so. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So I wanted to highlight really quickly some of the progress we've made on our grant approach. So if you haven't heard, South Carolina recently was awarded $100 million through the EPA Solar for All program. So yay. SCORE is leading this effort. So we, along with numerous partners, have been working really closely with SCORE to get that application in. And now they're working together to they expect funding to come in this fall. And their goal and what they applied for are these 4 main areas. So this This grant is all about solar investment for low income housing and affordable housing. So there's 4 sort of program areas they're looking at. Community solar, of course, which is the best for, low income residents, so you don't have to manage your own system yourself. A solar innovation fund, this would supply opportunities for city government buildings, city affordable housing to apply for some of this funding to be put on city structures, and also more innovative like resilience hubs, things like that, community centers. And then they're also going to focus on planning and working really with the state energy office to leverage all those new tax credits and rebates for energy. So another success we had, we can thank Wyoming. They dropped out of the climate pollution reduction planning program. They had, as a state, they were funding. So they that made us next in line for the funding. So the BCD-COG has accepted that funding and is working on distributing that to the counties in our area. So that's exciting too. We're working on a couple applications. These are the grant applications that we've recently submitted that we're waiting to hear from. So we've got the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant that we led. That was for our fleet transition plan and a purchase of our first EV truck, hopefully. And then the Climate Pollution Reduction Implementation Funding, SPOR is leading that. There were 4 subject areas in this huge grant: composting, energy, you name it was in there. So we're really crossing our fingers we get that funding for the state. That will give us implementation funding to do all kinds of things. That's the area. And then we did submit our DHEC solid waste grant recently too, and we'll hear about that in June. Natural Water Compost Program. So right now we're working with the COG, who is submitting the charging, fueling, and infrastructure grant. So this is for EV charging stations across the region. And there's a couple other ones that are coming up that we're considering and kind of going through that process now. So the EPA Clean Heavy Duty program just came out. So this is for EV garbage trucks, not this year, not next year, like very future. And anything heavy duty. So there is a cost share to that. There's also the DARE funding that has a cost share that's coming this fall. There are some requirements like budget commitment requirements for the EPA Clean Heavy Duty. So if you can imagine, a grant application is due, I think, July 24th. And what our grant manager is telling us is that we need a budget commitment by then, which we don't usually do. So that's a challenge that we're looking at right now. There's also an energy office mini grant for about $10,000. We're looking at going after, potentially partnering with the county on. And then we have some local nonprofits working on the EPA Community Change Grant. So that's a grant that is environmental justice, has no match to it. So we're working closely with those partners too. And then we expect the pass-through funding from the Urban and Community Forestry Grant applications to be available and open maybe this fall to early winter. So we're trying to prepare for that and make sure we're ready for that, because that is also funding for tree planting and maintenance in our disadvantaged communities with absolute zero match. And then I wanted to share, so this was our DHEC grant last year. We used some of it towards composting, and we used about 15,000 of it towards enhancing recycling in our city parks. So you can see here some of our challenges. We don't have a lot of recycling bins. These are very expensive. They run around like $1,300 a bin. And you can see like the signage up here, it fades in the sun. There was some side signage, it falls off. So a lot of our recycling bins in our parks are just not labeled well anymore. They faded, they needed attention. And because this infrastructure is so expensive and often seen as a low priority with our, many priorities in our city budget, it was something that really needed some grant funding to help boost it. So we used the DHEC funding to order a bunch of recycle top lids that won't fade because it's built into the product. And we ordered some new signs to be able to put all around the bin. So walking up to the bin, you could actually see that that was a recycling bin. And we had them installed. We now have 110 well-labeled recycling cans throughout 30 city parks. So this is really exciting. There were probably less than 10 before we started this grant. Like some had a lid, some were faded, some had a side signage. And Jamie Gillette in Parks just did a whole inventory of all of our city parks and got this all figured out. So I wanted to show you the budget just so you can see how expensive this is. So those lids run $155 each. And then the side signage is about $17 each. We're putting about 3 on each can. So we spent over $17,000 just getting recycling bins in city parks. Now, The good news is we have really good bins. They're gonna last us a long time. We expect this to hold up for a long time and not fade. We made sure, to focus on that. But I just wanted to point that out because I know the Parks Department has tried for numerous years to get more funding for initiatives like this, and the funding just doesn't go very far. So luckily, this was grant funded and we didn't have any city match for it. So I did want to share next steps. We have over 120 city parks, so we only have recycling in 30 right now. So Jamie did this amazing inventory of every park, and we know exactly where they're needed, how many, and it's really just coming down to funding now. So expanding that to other city parks, the more local parks. Right now, you're going to see the recycling in the more touristy areas, which is actually the hardest part to manage because a lot of times visitors are not as conscious of what they're putting in bins, and contamination is such an issue. And that's really why we started this project, because contamination was such an issue in these bins that the park staff weren't even able to recycle things that were in here. They were like, oh, this is just a bag of trash. I need to throw it away. So now we're actually diverting recyclables from here and training the staff to make sure they're using clear bags instead of the garbage bags so they can tell what is what. And then Christine and I were talking about this earlier. Charleston County Recycling does not accept recyclables in bags. So now we need parks to actually empty those bags, shake them out in the dumpster and pour them in loosely. So there's a couple extra steps here for staff. So maybe we could create some type of incentive or reward program for them for working on this. But huge thanks to the Parks Department, Jamie, Clark, and Jason for their major support on this. Are there any questions about that? Well, then I'd like to introduce Ariel Gerstein, who is the Sustainability Manager at Charleston County. Ariel and I have been working really closely together on this. The county is creating their first climate action plan, and they are at the stage where they're looking for public input. And she's just sharing information about the plan. And if anyone has any comments, there's public forums online, and I'm sure she'll share more about that with you. Here's your arrow buttons.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. And some of you have already heard this information, so sorry for hearing it again. So I'm just gonna run through this. As Katie said, feel free to stop me with any questions. So I'm Ariel Gerstein, Sustainability Manager, County. So sustainability is much newer to the county than it is for the city. So this program for sustainability started in 2021 for the county. So it's pretty new. It came from a directive from our council, and we hired this position. My position just started in 2021. We passed the climate action resolution. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it had 3 main points. And the third one, we have here encouraging the development implementation of a climate action plan. So this is kind of where the whole thing spun out of, where we're now developing our climate action plan. And in addition, we've been working on our FY 25 to 27, our strategic plan. So the draft climate action plan is in our strategic plan. So we are excited about that. So I'm just going to run through kind of what we've done so far and where we're looking to go. So why are we developing the plan? So of course we want to demonstrate leadership in reducing emissions. So I'm kind of looking back here. We want to manage climate related risks, preaching the choir here about, of course, we're living in a coastal area. We have a lot of climate related risks. We want to ensure our infrastructure is resilient. And similar to the city's plan, we have I think you guys have the 2030, target, but because we're doing this a few years later, we have our 2035 target, 60% emissions reduction. And then we're also going for a net zero 2050 reduction, which is kind of the gold standard. All right. So we have lots of documents online. If we have a very long, comprehensive climate action plan, we are working with consultants. So we did hire consultants. So they developed a very comprehensive detailed plan that is about 170 pages long. So if you want a very technical read, we have that online. We also have an FAQ, a 1-pager, an executive summary. So we have lots of different formats. You can, kind of get the high level view, the really in-depth view, and we have that all online for your fun reading. Here is our process. So this has been an 18-month process for us. We're right at the tail end of it. And we are there on the last circle right there. So we started in the beginning, we did the greenhouse gas inventory. We worked all with, lots of stakeholders. We have scenario modeling. So we have a low carbon action model that I'll kind of go through. And now we have our plan. So, it was really important that we had stakeholder engagement and we wanted to make sure that we had community input. One thing that was probably different from the city process is that as a county, of course, we only have jurisdiction over unincorporated areas, which is of course like a huge challenge for us. Because even though we're coming up with a county plan, we cannot, we can't say, hey, Mount Pleasant, hey, Isle of Palms, you guys got to do this. So it's really important that we work with all of our local municipalities. So we wanted to make sure that all the different municipalities are on board. And, we've tried our best to get all the different municipalities and on board. And, we're still in that process of working with these other municipalities to get them into this planning process. And they have been part of our some of the municipalities, especially the larger ones, have been part of our working groups. All right, so here's our engagement by the numbers. We did a lot of pre-engagement interviews. We do have a resilience and sustainability committee, which some of you are on, and kind of mirrors what the city's committee is. We did have a staff expert advisory team. We had public meetings where we went to meetings that were already being held and presented, what did people want to see in the plan? We did a lot of outreach events. We had 3 webinars. We had we had 2 different questionnaires, things like that. And this is our advisory committee on the left, and these were our CCAP members on the right. So you can see some of your names there and other names from different municipalities around in the county and some of our staff members. So this one is not currently active. This is just during our planning process. And this is our advisory committee that continues to meet, that will continue, assuming that the plan is approved by our council, which is we're still in the development stages, will continue to be. All right. So as I mentioned, we did a greenhouse gas inventory. We did the greenhouse gas inventory for 2020. So this is our greenhouse gas inventory. So we found that 6.4 million metric tons for 2020. Won't go fully over this, but I mean, it's typical what you see is greenhouse gas inventory that, buildings, transportation are always, the big sectors. That's not really probably a surprise for anyone in this room. So that's kind of what focus on in municipal is our county emissions. So if you end up reading our plan, you'll see that our plan is very community focused. We do have some actions that are county specific, but most of our actions are very community centered, because if we just focus on reducing our emissions, for the fleet transition or our buildings, we're just focusing on that 22 number, and that's not going to make very much impact. So we really want to focus on our community numbers. All right, so this is our pathway, and I think got to do a few more clicks here. There we go. All right, so the orange line, business as usual. So that's basically starting, what are we in, 2024, and we go to 2050. That is, we do nothing, just living life as we do. And as you see, it's kind of interesting because there is a little bit of a drop, and that's basically just because, technology improves, things like that. And the green line is if we were to implement this plan in its perfection. And so that is our low carbon scenario. And as you see, we use the term net zero. So we use the term net zero. We don't actually mean it's going to be like zero emissions. But we get to as close to net zero as possible. So that is gonna be a 94% reduction, and that is what we wanna see. And so this is what we're aiming for, is this green line. So that is what basically the plan is. That is what we're trying to implement. All right. So this is what we're trying to implement, and this is what our plan outlines. So these are what we're calling our 5 big categories. We call it our 5 big moves in the plan, but this is our 5 big categories. So circular economy, which as you can see is quite small. That's essentially the waste, compost, things like that. Innovative, so industry, ag is the second one. As you can see, kind of the 3 large ones: clean energy, transportation, and buildings. And the gray there is the remaining emissions, which is talking about is kind of just that, that we're not gonna get exactly to net zero. So that is what we're trying to get to. And I always think this graph is really interesting to look at, because if you just focus on one of these categories, then you're not gonna reach your full goal. All right, so we always try to say that this is, this plan is not just an environmental opportunity, it's an economic opportunity. So we like to show some of the economic numbers. So in 2023, households and businesses in the county spent $1.7 billion on energy. So I'm gonna have to read this to you guys because I want to get this information right. And this is not a financial person, so I want to make sure I get this part right. So I always like to use my note. So and this graph is important. I think there's a bunch of clicks on this one. Here we go. All right, so these are the incremental costs and savings resulting from the low carbon scenario. And so the incremental means the difference between the costs and savings and the business as usual in the low carbon scenario. So the incremental capital costs of around $500 million per year, there are incremental costs, capital costs, which sounds like a lot, but I mean, in the context of Charleston County's GDP, it's basically 1.5% or less. So this number includes the extra cost of purchasing EVs, heat pumps, installing solar and wind projects. And note that these investments are going to be made by households and businesses, not the county. So when a household purchases an EV, it contributes to these capital investments. So these investments generate energy cost savings, which are in the yellow. And as more and more investments are made, the savings increase over time so that they exceed the investments. And this is because as more and more heat pumps are purchased, of course, like heat pumps use 1/3 as much energy as a natural gas boiler, and the same thing for an electric vehicle uses less energy than a gas vehicle. And then we also, in the pink here, we have some revenue that comes from selling solar energy. So essentially, when you sum up all the costs and savings over the period, you get a net savings of $6.4 billion. So basically, this graph is just showing that the key point is that when we're using the low carbon pathway, Charleston County actually gets a savings. So we're essentially just trying to show that this is an economic savings, and we're not just saying, this is an environmental plan, which of course it is, but there is also a savings element in the long run to this plan.
Before you move on, did anyone do a breakdown of those savings? Like what's gas, what's diesel or natural gas or electricity?
I would have to look in the plan. I cannot remember if there's a breakdown. I can go back to that. And so you probably talked to this group about the Inflation Reduction Act. So of course, it's going on right now and it's going on for 10 years, all this federal money coming down the pipeline. And so this graph is just showing that if we incorporated it, we get an additional amount of savings. There's $150 million per year that we could use from those grants and incentives. So we have estimated that in 2020, the average household in Charleston County spends $5,200 per year in energy, and that would decline to $3,900 by 2050. and that this plan would create $3,400 per year. So I mentioned that these are like the 5 categories. We have 11 strategies and 53 actions in the plan under these 5 categories. Not going to go over these 53 actions today because we would be here all day. These are the 11 strategies, just to keep on time. I'm not going to read those, but you can dive into those in the material online. And just a little bit for timeline. So we've done 2 presentations to council. We're giving a final 3rd presentation on June 13th. And then the plan is that they will call a vote on June 18th. And if you're interested in giving any type of comment on the plan, the June 13th meeting is going to be a committee meeting, so it won't be open to comment. But the June 18th meeting will be a county council meeting, which will be open to comment. Of course, that's always subject to change, but that is our plan right now. And sorry, that link is like blued out.
We can email it out.
Okay, yeah, and you can find, we did have a public comment period for the documents, so we don't have public comment open for the documents right now, but if you do have any comments on materials, I'm happy to, please send it my way. So any questions on that? Oh, and I did want to mention, just in terms of support, we, on Tuesday, the town of Mount Pleasant voted to approve a resolution supporting the county's climate action plan. So we're excited about that. So, yeah.
Well, I did have a question. So thanks for mentioning what Mount Pleasant did. Is there anything that the city can do to support the county's plan?
I will.
That is up to you guys. I can't.
Can I make a comment though? I would suggest that, again, there are so many plans and so many different things going on. If there is a level of cohesion there or something where the city, even if you guys are already working on some of these areas, it would be great to see where there's some overlap. I think we want to start to thread these needles with things that we're working on. So that would be
Well,
my
to
suggestion.
help you out, it help you out. Since Diamond and I served on that committee, there is, the county plan follows basically what the city initiated. I mean, this committee, sitting in this room right now, was the initiators of the first climate action plan ever in the state of South Carolina. We now have the county looking at it, which is similar. I don't know how many of you know that on March the 1st, a joint committee composed of advisory committees, which some of us also were on for the State Office of Resilience and DHEC. They submitted the preliminary climate action plan for the state to EPA. Of course, the money helps coming in, but we were talking before, 5 years ago, some of us were pushing, could we ever have a state climate action plan? And everyone looked like, no, and now we are going to have. So I think it's really similar, and I think that it would really require, Christine and I had this conversation before the meeting tonight, this afternoon, that everyone here would have to say, I read the plan before we endorse it. So I think that the fact that we do, as a city, have the first plan, this is modeling it, state's modeling ours, also is indicative of that. So, if
Yeah,
everyone's
I
okay
mean,
with that.
and just to answer your question, I mean, there's a lot of very similar or overlapping action items in the city and county plan. So assuming that our plan is approved, there'll be tons of collaboration.
And again, with the state plan, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And I know that obviously serving on all these committees, but did the citizens know, these things are open, and that's all I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah,
good
yeah,
them to
for
see
sure.
that everyone's working
For
together.
sure. Yeah, no, totally, I totally agree.
So I didn't read all the plan, but I did read the section that I know the most about.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you.
On the clean energy side. So,
Yeah.
and Scott
Yeah, right,
So-
yeah,
and so my comments were filtered obviously through
good Scott, yeah,
So here's it's a question and then like a comment. So
okay.
so like in that section,
Uh-huh.
the the ability to ultimately execute is tied to state statute.
Yeah,
So the question is, it looks aspirational. And there's no executable. And I'll give you the example. So if I think the number was 750 megawatts of utility scale solar integrated. Okay, so that could come from the natural integration of that in a resource plan. So it could happen organically. But like I'd make a real clear connection. So that people, so 750 megawatts, that's $1 billion of investment. So even when you take Inflation Reduction Act dollars, it's a lot of money.
yeah.
So then to get the actionable item, does that mean 750 and $1 billion of investment by somebody in Charleston County? And is it on Charleston County land? I'd be real clear about how you're getting to the answer under the current regulatory environment and under the statute. Because all those are established. It's hard coded into law. It's in the Energy Freedom Act, how that actually works. So I'd be careful about that. Because then you're gonna end up with, if you're not, you're gonna end up with a clear, unexecutable plan. And then we've just paid for something that that we can't get to.
There is one difference between the city plan and the proposed county plan. In the city plan, we had specifics that were going to happen because the plan was approved. The county plan, there is nothing in the county plan that gets executed upon passage of that plan. Every single thing in that plan needs to come back to the county council for further legislative action. Does that help out a little bit?
Yeah, I just
I
think,
get-
I
I
think
get what
it's,
you're
I think it's a
saying.
little tricky with
I get
this.
what
I
you're
think, because people will say, okay, this is where we're going, and then we're gonna hit a set goal. And then they're gonna ask, okay, what are you going to do to execute? So that's
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
saying because like that's not under county control.
You don't, I
Yeah.
mean, and like. If it is, well, there's all kind of like implications that come with that. If the 750 megawatts of solar are in Charleston County. Okay, that's 5,000 acres of land. I think somebody
Or
would care.
rooftops.
There aren't enough rooftops in Charleston County to meet that goal with orientation to the south and the west. I'm just saying, like, you got to deal with the physics and the economics. And so execution, I think, in the end of the day is the ability to execute. It's fine to have aspirational. Like our company has an aspirational goal
Right.
of net zero by 2050. I can tell you there's not a physical way in the world you could hit that number right now with the technology. You can get to a certain number and people couldn't afford it. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. Like the physics and the economics at least have to be like embedded in reality to get us trajectorily where we want to get to go.
Okay, yeah, no, I point taken and I'll discuss that with my consultants.
Yep.
Thanks.
And I'm glad to talk to them too. I've been a witness before the commission 10 times. I can tell you, they can have all my testimony.
Okay.
It's pretty clear.
Okay, thanks.
Well, could we ask the council, the city council, to, take time to read the plan, and then at some point before the June 18th county meeting, could y'all have in one of your meetings, maybe someone could put forward a resolution to support the counties?
Sure.
Well, when is the county is scheduled for when?
You said June 18th?
So the presentation is on the 13th and then, because we have a finance committee and then that's like a Thursday and then the vote would be the next week, the Tuesday. That's how our meetings work.
On the
Okay.
18th.
So we only have one city council meeting in June.
When is that?
And yeah,
It's the
so,
same day.
I'm not sure we'll be able to meet that time frame.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what I'm
we're running
wondering.
into a time crunch on that from
Yeah.
the city perspective in terms of getting it on the agenda and having it,
Sure.
voted on by council. So that would be the only limitation there.
Yeah.
But
Unless
they can
y'all-
always support it after the fact,
That's right.
right?
I mean, on individual basis, nothing prevents us from talking to our county council member and saying, hey, this is, this mirrors our plan. It's a great idea.
Right, yeah, because I think the city's plan, I've been, pleasantly surprised that, it's not just a plan sitting on the shelf. It's active, it's being accomplished, and it's just great to see the progress. So, if we can encourage the county to do the same and get down to more specifics in their plan, going forward, I think that's what we should be doing.
I mean, I worked on the original city plan. Which really wasn't, at the end of the day, there were a few aspirational things. They were like really targeted.
That's right, yeah.
They were like, they zeroed in on some like really actionable items, but actually in the end of the day, moved the needle. I would suggest that the city of Charleston might be the most focused on some of the, what I would call transitional sustainability approach, because they did it early, but they also got really action stuff. So
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you looked at ours, I think there's a number, we have different categories, like we will have educational, programmatic, some we're leading and then some we're supporting, like there's some actions, where like the port would have to lead, or this one, there's some like this, they're not county led, like we can't.
I almost think about breaking it out. I didn't read it fully but I just kind of read that section, but maybe it's broken out and here's like real short-term actionable items. Here's the intermediate. And here's kind of aspirational things. We support this. We don't have any ability to create the financing model or we maybe do, but here's what we might do. Because that I think makes it real for people.
Well, and this is something that, assuming it gets passed, like that we would talk about in an advisory committee is how we're gonna prioritize all of these actions, and because it's a 5-year plan and which ones we would work on first that we think we can get accomplished in the next, year or two that we think, are gonna be, and the IRA funds, like what we wanna focus on for grants, things like that. So that kind of stuff, because some are gonna be more easily achievable and some are gonna be a lot more challenging and further out and that kind of stuff, so. But no, I appreciate your comments.
One idea, just in the interest of time, it sounds like there's a lot of people on the committee, this committee that have already reviewed this. We could send it out for other comments and review, and if the committee wanted to do like a quick email vote, they could recommend it. It doesn't necessarily have to go to city council, and we could get back to you before you present it. That's sort of,
That's a good
that's
idea.
the duty of this committee,
Right.
is to make recommendations.
Right.
City council doesn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so Katie will you're gonna send something out?
I will email you all, yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ariel.
Yep, thanks for your time.
Okay, and we do have a public comment period. We're running a little late. If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand online or unmute yourself if you're a panelist. I don't
Okay.
see anyone there. Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Councilmember Seekings, Councilmember Gregg. Yes.
Katie, it's Mike. Can I just have 2 seconds, please?
Yes.
As some, if not many of you will recall, and some time ago now, based on the recommendations of this committee, Charleston City Council adopted an internal policy to phase out the use of gas-driven leaf blowers in all of our outdoor departments, and we've achieved that. Both the mayor and I have, in the last few weeks, received letters from some of the larger associations of the peninsula asking that we visit now the phasing out in the city of that equipment. And so what I would like to ask of this committee, and maybe you, Katie, at the next meeting, put it on an agenda and maybe give us just a few minutes of what something like that might look like in terms of an ordinance, how it might work. It would certainly have to be something we did in a phased approach, but I think the time is right for it. I think there's an appetite for it. We've tried it before. I think this committee would be a good use of its time to try to vet something to city council that would eventually lead to the phasing out of gas-driven leaf blowers in the city of Charleston. So that's my request, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah, we've done a lot of research on that subject before, so we have a lot of it, and if that's the will of Mayor Cogswell and City Council and this committee, we can certainly do that. Would anyone else like to be heard? Okay, hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you. All right, I guess you should say that, Vice Chair.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm getting hung up.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Good seeing you. I didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Be careful. George.
Thank you.
When are we getting our letter of approval?
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
Good.
Thanks, Megan.
Huh?
I know.
Committee.
Well, I mean, it's
Amazing.
Yeah. I hope.
And,
I mean, I guess we just had our first meeting with the so with that following.
I mean, honestly, I don't think we
don't need to.
So,
Right, right.
so-
They're gonna
They were gonna actually
Yeah,
have a discussion.
yeah.
No, you should have a discussion.
You think mainly like you can't really elaborate and that's just the main thing. Yeah, once it's passed, we are doing a lot of time. So it's like, what do we communicate? Yeah.
Oh, be safe.
We just can't, like, because about this issue, like, what are we doing collaboratively?
Because it is an experience.
Also,
So you,
vote goes out.
I would, in your discussion with